Hey, how's it going? I'd like to talk to you about manual swapping your S60R or V70R Volvo. These cars were sold with 5-speed, 6-speed automatic, and 6-speed manual transmissions. It seems like, especially on the wagons, most of them were sold as automatics. So now as they age, sometimes you'll find yourself in a position where you'll find an automatic wagon versus a manual wagon, or you'll find a big price difference between the two as to where it might make sense to buy that automatic wagon and swap it over to manual. These cars are starting to show up, in junkyards and pick and pulls, so sometimes the parts can be had cheap. However, from what I've seen, manual wagons do get kind of a premium when they go for sale. In my situation, I was able to pick up this beautiful Sonic Blue 2006 V70R with automatic transmission problems. The 6-speed was having issues with one of the locking solenoids for the torque converter. What would happen is, as the transmission would warm up, it would lock up that solenoid and then never unlock it. So the car drove somewhat okay until you came to a stop, and then it would not allow itself to go back into neutral and would stall. I could have swapped another automatic in it. I could have maybe fixed that valve body. But to me, the idea of being able to buy this car and then swap it over to manual and really create something cool outweighed the other options. I was very lucky to find somebody down in San Diego who had a 2004 S60R manual that had just had an entire clutch job done on it, and then had been rear-ended. I was able to pick up the entire swap, as well as all the parts had just been replaced for what I thought was a reasonable deal. So let's talk about that. Let's talk what kind of parts you need to be able to swap one of these over. Starting from inside the car, you're going to need the pedal box, both the clutch pedal and the brake pedal. The brake pedal on the manual, of course, is also smaller. You're going to need the shifter assembly. Moving your way in, you're going to need, of course, the shifter cables and the clutch line with the clutch master cylinder, as well as a clutch switch and a clutch switch pigtail. Under the hood, you're going to want to have the clutch itself, flywheel, sorry, it took me a second, the dual mass flywheel, the transmission, axles, angle gear, the mount that connects the engine mount on the steering rack on this car is a little bit different on the manuals, and of course the M66 manual transmission. Sometimes it makes sense to buy all those parts new, the wear items. I was very lucky to buy some low mileage ones. If you're going to do like me and find some low mileage ones, do make sure that the flywheel's been replaced, the dual mass, especially if they go over 100,000 miles, it's just not a good idea to reuse them. The clutches themselves are one-time use only, as in the first time you use them, they kind of click into position with these little springs on the pressure plate that need to be reset. And there's like there's a procedure in the Volvo manual how to reset those. Luckily enough for me, the person who sold me these parts was a Volvo tech, and he did the little jazz with that pressure plate to get it reset for me. The slave cylinder on these cars is quite fragile, so I would definitely recommend replacing them because they're internal to the gearbox, to the bell housing, so if the slave cylinder starts to leak, you have to pull that entire transmission out again. So as you can see in the picture, all the parts are not that exhaustive, but do make sure you have everything. Let's talk about the installation. What I like to do is make a 3-pedal automatic. So some afternoon where you have a bit of time, it works out that you can swap in the manual pedals and leave the car as an automatic. So like a Thursday or Friday afternoon, I like to go in there and pull the pedal box and install the manual pedal box. The dash does not need to come out. The instrument cluster does. There are 2 bolts back there. The carpet needs to kind of be moved out of the way, as there's some bolts down there. The steering shaft needs to be unbolted. It's just 1 bolt and it swings out of the way, and then you can put the new steering box in. Took me about an hour once I figured out that you had to kind of pull the brake booster forward. I actually had a friend of mine pulling it forward, and then I ended up using a ratchet strap just to kind of pull it forward, so the studs come out of the flywheel to slide that pedal box in. Once you're ready for the big day, You can do this on jack stands, you can do this in your driveway. I was lucky enough to have a lift. You're going to want to have 2 engine support hoists available, no matter where you're doing it, because the engine needs to be supported. And once you get rid of that subframe underneath it, nothing is connecting that engine to the car. Several jacks. I had access to a transmission jack, which made life easier. Floor jacks and a couple of buddies could also help there, as well, of course, as jack stands and everything you need to get your car without its wheels. So the general overview, I'm not going to do this bolt by bolt. You take the front subframe out. It's the 4 big bolts. The rear subframe has also these little plates that also come out, which are another extra 2 bolts, as well as the ball joints come undone, and the sway bar gets disconnected, and the steering rack gets disconnected from the subframe. Once all that is out of the way, you can lower that subframe. Support that motor first. You're going to want to support that motor, because if you try to remove the subframe with nothing else holding it, it's just going to come down with it. I support the motor by removing the strut bar motor mount and putting those 2 engine hoists in place. Once the subframe's out of the way, you can remove your axles, you can remove your angle gear. I personally did not remove the exhaust. I didn't find it to be in the way. Once the angle gear is out of the way, you can start removing the transmission and the transmission cooling lines. Not a huge deal. It is heavy. Make sure to get all 6 torque converter bolts out. They're a little hidden, a little hard to get to, but I was able to do most of that by myself. Great opportunity to wash everything, if you have access to a pressure washer. Great opportunity to put engine mounts in. I mean, you might not notice it with your automatic if your engine mounts are very worn, but I guarantee you they are. So as you go to a manual setup, it's just good insurance to put those mounts in there. Once you have everything out of the way, you can start putting the dual mass flywheel on, the clutch on, the manual transmission comes up with the slave cylinder. Make sure you clock it just right. It's got a little notch on top where the crank position sensor sits, and if you don't have that line right, it won't go in. Never force a manual transmission to an engine. If it doesn't slip in, you either do not align the clutch disc properly inside behind the pressure plate, or something else is binding. Don't ever do that thing where you put it up there, it's about ½ an inch off, and you just ram a bolt in. Nothing good comes out of that. You should be able to just wiggle it, and it'll kind of make a nice plunk noise. Once it's in, then you put all the bolts in. The starter stays the same, don't worry about it. Get your hydraulics hooked up to the cabin, install your master cylinder. No need to drill any holes. The firewall has a little access plate that gets removed, and the master cylinder goes in there in its place. Once that is in, you can install your axles, your angle gear, engine mount, and then put that subframe back in. It's heavier, but nothing is really what I would call hard. Once all that is in place, you take apart your center console. You do not need to buy another center console. You just need the shifter assembly with a manual shifter and shift cables. And the cover, of course, that goes around the shifter plate for the space ball. Assemble all that, route the cables underneath the HVAC unit, under the pedals, into the engine bay. That was probably the most annoying part of the job. It's really kind of a tight fit in there where you have to just muscle it in, but not too bad. Once you have everything bolted in, you have new fluid in your manual transmission, new fluid in your angle gear, your CV axles are in, everything is good and pristine. The car's back on its wheels, double check everything, follow torque specs, get, new CV axle bolts if you're gonna, reuse them, maybe put some Loctite on them. The trick I found to start in this car, which is a 2006 and it had the 6-speed TF80 SC transmission, is I removed the transmission computer from the transmission. It's 4 bolts, it's right on top, and it just comes out, and the connector just unplugs itself. It's got a keyway that you can turn over to say neutral. Once you've done that, you plug it back into the engine harness of the car, and the car will think it's in neutral, which will allow you to start the car and drive home, or drive to work, or whatever you got to do after all the mechanical work is done. Once the mechanical work is done, you still have some wiring work to do and some electronics work to do. The wiring work involves wiring that clutch sensor pigtail and switch from underneath the dashboard to the DME, or in Volvo talk ECM. It's 2 wires. Reverse wire has got to be wired in from the transmission to the transmission control module. That's 2 wires as well. None of these really have any impact until the car is coded over and programmed over. So what do I mean by those? You have to program the car from automatic to manual in the engine computer. Some tuners do this for free. My tuner, Contrast, just said, hey, I'll send you the manual file for free. I decided to go ahead and get a stage 1 tune while I was in there. So he sent me a stage 1 tune as a manual car. That basically made the car no longer have a check engine light. And as far as I understand, emission-wise, now the car, acts like a manual and can pass emissions, in the plug-in ODV2 style emissions. The coding has to do with the central electronics module, which lives right in front of the dashboard, kind of below the wipers there. And that is locked down by Volvo with a pin. To get access to this pin, there are a couple different ways. I've not personally done it, but it sounds like some tuners can kind of like hack their way in. Some softwares can kind of extract it, or some people pull the chip with that information out of the module and read it on a bench. Again, it's something you'll have to do at some point, but the car does drive fine. I've put, 3,000 to 5,000 miles on this car without that done. But once that is done, your cruise control will start working again. The clutch interlock safety, now the car without that will start in any gear, clutch in, not clutch in. And as well as a transmission failure light will go off. On the little dim display, it says transmission failure now every time I start the car. The RPMs flare a little bit also between shifts now because the car doesn't know when I'm shifting gears. These modern cars need to know when you shift gears, and when you hit that clutch pedal, it drops the RPM about 300-400 RPM. The car has been amazing though. Like I said, a couple thousand miles on it. I drive in a very hilly, congested city. I have a boatload of fun. I drove it up to the mountains, as you saw in the first clip starting this video, in the snow, second, third gear, just all sorts of fun. I really recommend doing this if you have access to the parts, if you have the know-how and you have some time. It's something that I feel like will increase the value of your car, make it more fun to drive, and will also make it more reliable down the road. The purpose of me sharing this with you is I really care about these Volvos. I think they're really cool cars. And I feel like the more we share information about them, the more we can keep them on the road and help other enthusiasts out enjoying these fantastic automobiles. Hey, thanks for watching.